Today I'm going to be showing you how to make these Puerto Rican style stuffed potato balls, or as we call them, rellenos de papa. These potato balls are a super popular street food in Puerto Rico. They have a thin, crispy shell, and on the inside, the potato is very soft and creamy. Now first, let's see the ingredients that we're going to need. The most important ingredient that we'll need is the potato. We'll need about 2 pounds of potato. Here I'm using russet potatoes, but you could also use Yukon Gold potatoes. So to season the potato, I only use 1 teaspoon of salt. We also need 2 tablespoons of cornstarch and 1/4 cup of cornstarch. These two have different purposes. The 2 tablespoons are going to be added to the mashed potatoes because this is going to help the potato balls not fall apart while frying, while the 1/4 cup is going to be used to coat the potato balls. To prepare the filling or the ground beef, we first need to use 2 tablespoons of sofrito, 2 tablespoons of tomato sauce, which you could substitute with 1 tablespoon of tomato paste. To season the meat, we need 1 teaspoon of adobo and 1.5 teaspoons or 1 packet of sazon seasoning. For the meat, I used 1 pound, which was 80% lean. But for the potato balls, we won't need the full pound. Later, I'll tell you what you could do with the leftover meat. We'll also add 1/2 cup of water to the meat. Next, the first thing we have to do is to rinse the potatoes and remove any dirt they might have. Then, what I like to do is to take the pot where I'm going to cook the potatoes, pour water into it, and place it right next to me where I'm going to peel and cut the potatoes so I could quickly put the potatoes in the pot after cutting them so they don't brown. Next, what we need to do is to peel the potatoes, and that is if you don't want to leave the skin on, which although it's not common, you could still leave the skin on if you want. Now, I always tend to leave those little bits of skin that I can't reach, but I try to peel as much skin as I can. Now, look at the size of this potato right here. This potato weighs probably almost 1/4 of a pound. That is why I don't tell you, oh, you need X amount of potatoes, but I rather tell you how many pounds because sometimes potatoes are either too small or too big. I never peel the potatoes perfectly, but if I see little black spots, I make sure I completely remove them. And I continue like this until I have peeled all the potatoes. Then I like to rinse the potatoes once again because they always have some dirt left from the skin. Rinse them well until the water runs clear. Then the next step is to cut the potatoes. It really doesn't matter how you cut the potatoes. What matters is the size. What I do is cut the potatoes into 4, and then each quarter I take it and I cut it into half and I cut it into 1-inch cubes. You can cut the potatoes as large or as small as you like, but this will affect the cooking time. If you cut the potatoes too large, then they'll take longer to cook. And if you cut them into very small pieces, they'll cook very quickly, but if they are in the water for too long, they'll start absorbing the water. And this is not good because if the potatoes absorb too much water, it will be harder to give it a round shape. Next, we cook the potatoes cover over high heat for 15 minutes. While the potatoes are cooking, we prepare the filling. In a pan over high heat, we'll add the sofrito and also the tomato sauce or tomato paste. We'll saute this for about a minute while stirring so we make sure it doesn't burn or it doesn't stick to the pan. You can actually add everything at once, but I think it gives it more flavor if you do it this way. Then we add the ground beef. And the most important thing when cooking the ground beef is to constantly separate the meat because the ground beef will cook into a block altogether if we don't separate it. Then we add the adobo to add flavor, and we add the sazon for flavor and to add some color. What is commonly used as a stuffing when making these rellenos de papa or stuffed potato balls, at least in Puerto Rico, is ground beef. But you can also use ground chicken or ground turkey and just season it the same way. Next, we'll add the water to the meat, and the water will help us to break the meat more easily. Now, while the meat cooks, all we have to do is to break up the meat. You have to keep doing this because you want no lumps in your meat. This meat will cook in about 10 minutes. So you have 10 minutes of breaking up and stirring the meat. Now for this recipe, we only need 4 ounces of cooked meat. I usually buy 1 pound packages of ground beef. So even if I only need 4 ounces, I still go ahead and make the whole thing because I just don't want to make a mess just to make a little bit of meat. What I do with the leftovers, if I'm not going to use them the next day, is to freeze them. And the best thing is that later on, on when I'm busy but I want to eat something really good, I can quickly defrost the meat and use it. Once the meat is cooked, taste it to see if it needs some seasoning. And look how delicious this ground beef looks. Now after the 15 minutes have passed, what we do is check with a fork to see if our potatoes are tender. Then we'll add the salt and the 2 tablespoons of cornstarch. Then we have to strain the potatoes and put them in a big bowl so we can mash them. Now something that people have asked me before is if I don't salt the water when I boil the potatoes, and the answer is no. Well, it really depends. When I make this at home, I do add salt to the water because I can taste it and know exactly what flavor I'm going for. But since I'm making this recipe for you guys, I only add salt to the potatoes once they are cooked so they could turn out the same way every time, because not everybody is going to boil their potatoes in the same amount of water. So I think this is a better way. Now, mash the potato until there's no visible lumps. I'm using a fork here, but if you have one of those potato mashers, that's even better because it's gonna make the job so much easier. And just like the meat, give the potato a quick taste to make sure that the potato has a good flavor and it doesn't need any more seasoning. Now, here's one of the things that I did with some of the leftover meat. I used the same meat recipe for anything like lasagna, tacos, topping for hot dogs, baked potatoes, or even french fries. I had some savory appetizer cones that I made earlier this week. These cones are great because you could fill them with almost anything. What I did here was to remove most of the liquid of the meat and fill the cone with about 2 tablespoons of meat. And believe me, they are super delicious. You could add chicken, you could add vegetables, whatever you want. I'll leave the recipe link in the description below just in case you want to make it. Now back to the stuffed potatoes. To scoop the mashed potatoes, you could use a spoon, an ice cream scoop, or you could use a 1/2 cup measuring cup. First, you need to scoop 1/2 cup of the potato mix, and you want to flatten the ball in your hand. You want to flatten it until it almost looks more or less like a small tortilla. You're going to try to make it as round, or at least as round as possible as you can make it. Then you'll want to move the mixture from one hand to another hand. 1, so it doesn't stick to your hand, and 2, so it also doesn't burn your hand because this is going to be hot. Now in the middle, you want to add 2 tablespoons of ground beef or whatever stuffing it is that you're using. Then you want to start closing your hand and bringing up to the top the mixture, and then with your thumbs you want to push down the meat as you close the potato ball, and this almost closes itself up. You won't have a hard time shaping it. It is really easy once you get the hang of it. Then with your hands, you just have to finish up shaping the balls and make them as round as possible, but don't worry because they don't have to be perfect. Now after you make a couple of these potato balls, your hands will start to feel sticky. Wash them because this will prevent you from making the potato balls properly, because the dough is going to stick to your hand when you try to seal them. So wash your hands, dry them well, and repeat the same process. Flatten the mashed potato, add the meat, and shape it. Repeat this until you made all the 7 potato balls, which is what this recipe yields. I don't remember where it was, but I saw someone say that this recipe could be made with instant mashed potatoes. I have never tried it myself because I like to use fresh potatoes and make the rellenos the traditional way, at least the way we do it in Puerto Rico. But if you want to avoid having to peel and chop the potatoes, you could give this method a try. And if you do it this way, let me know in the comments if you liked it and how it went. Now finish all the rellenos, and this step should take you about 8 to 10 minutes. Next, pour the 1/4 cup of cornstarch on a plate. This is to coat the potato balls. Now I'll give you a tip here so you don't make the same mistake that I made, which was choosing a plate that it was too large instead of a small one. That was the first plate I saw, so that was the first one I grabbed. But I suggest using a smaller plate because it will be easier to pick up the cornstarch because we don't have a lot, which is why I had a hard time grabbing it from the plate. Here, you're going to be coating the rellenos as much as possible, and then you just have to make sure to remove any excess cornstarch that you might have. The easiest way to do this step is to slowly rub the cornstarch off, but remember to do this part very gentle because the potato balls are still very soft at this stage. Now, instead of cornstarch, you could use all-purpose flour. I just prefer to use cornstarch because I think it makes a crispier coating, but you could definitely use all-purpose flour as a breading. Then in a small pot or caldero, Pour in the oil. I used 2 cups of oil, but it was because I used a small caldero. So the amount of oil will depend on how big your pot is. But the important thing is that the oil covers at least half of the potato balls. Set the heat to medium high and wait for the oil to get hot before putting in the rellenos, which is something I didn't do because I was trying to rush. You could check if the oil is hot by adding a pinch of cornstarch or all-purpose flour. If it bubbles, the oil is ready. And add the potato balls to the oil and cook for about 6 minutes or 3 minutes per side, or until the rellenos have a golden brown color. Now, this is where a lot of people go wrong because they tend to move the rellenos too quickly. It is super important not to move them for the first 2 minutes. Remember, they are soft, and if you move them, they will fall apart. That's why we wait until they form a crust underneath, and then we can move them without breaking them. Always be careful. It is also important to use the right tool to move them so they don't break apart. Don't use anything sharp like a fork. If your pot is large enough, you can fry all of these at once, but if not, then you'll just have to make them in batches. Now, I suggest that you fry these just before you eat them because that's when they taste best. This is a great recipe to make as a snack, to serve at parties or get-togethers because you can even make them smaller, and they are absolutely delicious. Once the rellenos are finished frying, take them out and place them on a paper towel to absorb all the excess oil. You'll notice that the rellenos look a little bit whitish, but that is normal when using cornstarch as a breading. So if you want to avoid that, you can use all-purpose flour. Now, if you're not going to fry these the same day, my advice is to store them in a bowl with cornstarch or flour at the bottom so they don't stick. And very importantly, they need to be covered so they don't dry out. Now look how delicious these rellenos de papa or stuffed potato balls look. They are beautiful and delicious. Remember, I will leave the recipe link in the description below just in case you want to see it. And thanks for watching. See you in the next video.